somebody step in a duck?
Come to Carl.
The making of Caddyshack was so chaotic that even the people involved didn't believe it would ever become a classic. In 1980, a first-time director and a production spiraling out of control under the influence of cocaine on a Florida golf course created what looked like a guaranteed flop. But instead, it became one of the most iconic comedies in film history. So how did complete chaos turn into a classic? And what really happened behind the scenes that shaped every legendary moment? Join us as we uncover 10 wild facts about Caddyshack that you most probably didn't know about. Number 10. A 4.5-hour-long mess. The script that Harold Ramis, Brian Doyle Murray, and Douglas Kenney brought to the production, according to the executives who read it, was something that looked like a telephone book. Mark Canton, one of the film's executives, joked that it looked like the Bible because it was about 200 pages of material. Harold, who was directing for the first time, used a yes-and approach from his Second City background, meaning he rarely rejected ideas on set. So more and more footage just kept piling up. When the editing process began, the first cut came in at 4.5 hours and was a complete mess. A collection of brilliant individual moments that had no connective tissue holding them together. Several editors were brought in to try to fix it, but they all had trouble finding a clear story that could turn the footage into one smooth, connected film, instead of just a collection of funny scenes. The problem was not a shortage of funny material. The problem was there was too much of it, and no clear structure to hold it together during editing. But if the edit was the first crisis of the production, the second crisis began long before anyone sat down in a cutting room. It started the moment the cameras arrived in Florida and a hurricane showed up uninvited. Number 9. A hurricane shut down the production and the cast threw a party. Caddyshack was filmed over 11 weeks in the autumn of 1979 at Rolling Hills Country Club in Davie, Florida, a location that was picked just to keep the production away from Los Angeles studio executives who might have second thoughts about what they were funding. In early September, Hurricane David, a Category 2 storm, made landfall in Florida and hit the production so hard that filming had to be suspended for multiple days while the set recovered. The cast and crew, most of whom had no particular experience with Florida hurricanes and found the whole thing fascinating rather than threat, responded in the way that the Caddyshack production responded to almost every obstacle. They treated it as an occasion to party. The hotel where the cast and crew were staying was damaged enough that the floors were covered with earthworms in the hurricane's aftermath. The cast was already operating in a state of sustained late-night excess that the Florida heat and the distance from studio oversight had done nothing to moderate. The hurricane, if anything, just made the already wild atmosphere even more intense, with people behaving in ways a normal film production wouldn't allow. The location choice itself came with a second complication. Rolling Hills Country Club sat directly under a flight path from Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, meaning that virtually every outdoor scene had to contend with low-flying commercial aircraft disrupting the sound recording. Bill Murray's younger brother John, who was on set as a production assistant, was assigned the unglamorous job of watching the sky and alerting Ramis whenever an incoming plane was about to wreck a take. The airport problem and the hurricane damage were the kinds of obstacles that simply had to be absorbed and worked around. But the drug situation on the Caddyshack set was something that operated at a different level of intensity entirely. Let's talk about that. Number 7. Cocaine was the fuel that kept the film running. Supporting actor Peter Berkrot, who played the caddy Angie D'Annunzio, described the atmosphere on the Caddyshack set with a directness that later accounts have generally confirmed. Cocaine, he said, was the fuel that kept the film running. The late 1970s were a specific moment in Hollywood history when cocaine was common in ways that are difficult to fully reconstruct from the present. And the Caddyshack production was filming in Florida, away from studio oversight, with a cast that included some of the most hard-partying figures of the Saturday Night Live generation. The studio was already concerned. Filming at the same time as Caddyshack and releasing the same summer was The Blues Brothers, which had John Belushi in its cast and was experiencing its own cocaine-related budget escalations. When the studio became aware of what John's drug use was costing that production, it forced a crackdown on the parties on the Caddyshack set, though accounts suggest the crackdown didn't fully work, and the overall atmosphere stayed mostly the same. Director Harold Ramis, who came from an improv and writing background rather than a directing one, was more focused on the creative process than on controlling the cast's personal behavior, so the set ended up being very free and relaxed for everyone involved. And part of the reason it came together as well as it did is that the chaotic environment produced one of the most remarkable acts of pure improvisation in the history of comedy film from a performer who was only on set for 6 days and who nobody was entirely sure was going to show up at all. Number 6. Bill Murray improvised everything. Bill Murray's presence in Caddyshack was, as far as scheduling goes, mainly a controlled accident. He was, at the time, committed to Saturday Night Live and to filming Where the Buffalo Roam, a Hunter S. Thompson biopic. The window available for Caddyshack was narrow and somewhat theoretical. Ramis, who was Bill's friend and collaborator, had him for 6 days, if Bill showed up, which was not guaranteed. According to accounts from the production, Bill took over Lorne Michaels's Volkswagen Bug, drove it from Los Angeles to Florida via Aspen, and took it upon himself to install a stereo in the car along the way, arriving on set on his own timeline rather than the production's. The character of Carl Spackler, the groundskeeper who wages private war against the gopher and who delivers the Cinderella speech, and the Dalai Lama story that have become two of the most quoted monologues in comedy film, does not appear once in the 200-page original script. The name Carl Spackler is simply absent from the document. Bill built the character from scratch during his 6 days on set, using an improvised voice, an improvised physicality, and an improvised relationship to the material that Ramis gave him. The Cinderella speech, Cinderella story, out of nowhere, a former greenskeeper, now about to become the Masters champion, came from Ramis asking Bill to imagine himself narrating his own fantasy sports moment. Bill then asked for 4 rows of chrysanthemums to destroy as he walked, and then he did the scene. The Dalai Lama speech, the big hitter, the Lama monologue that ends with a promise of total consciousness on your deathbed as payment for a season of free golf, was entirely Bill's invention and was delivered in one take. The scene between Carl and Ty Webb, in which Bill's character wanders into Chevy Chase's character's house uninvited, was added after Bill had already wrapped and returned to Saturday Night Live, because someone realized during the edit that the 2 biggest stars of the film had never shared the screen. Bill came back for a single day to shoot it, and the result is one of the loosest and most genuinely funny scenes in the film. 2 performers with no script and no particular plan, working in real time, producing something that neither of them could have produced alone. Murray's presence on the set was extraordinary, partly because it was so brief, but the gopher, which ended up with more screen time than almost any human character, was not in the original plan at all. And the story of how it came to dominate the film is one of the stranger pieces of Hollywood production history on record. Number 5. The Gopher Emergency Solution. In the original conception of Caddyshack, the gopher appeared in a single scene. as a minor comic element that briefly interrupted the main action and then disappeared. It was not a recurring character, but a sight gag in a film that was primarily about the class dynamics between the caddies and the country club membership. When the 4.5-hour cut proved impossible to organize into a coherent film, it was executive producer John Peters who identified the gopher as the potential solution. If you could build more footage around the animal, you would have a recurring visual element that could function as connective tissue across scenes that had no other relationship to each other. The studio was asked for an additional $500,000 to make it work. They agreed, and the gopher became the spine of the film's second edit. The gopher that audiences responded to so enthusiastically, the one that dances to Kenny Loggins and peers out of its hole with apparent satisfaction at the chaos around it, was a foam and latex construction that had been built as a last resort to rescue a film from the editing room floor. The gopher was the emergency fix, but the explosion that closes the film created its own emergency, one that briefly convinced a commercial airline pilot that a plane had gone down over South Florida. Number 4. The climactic explosion that triggered a plane crash report. The country club at Rolling Hills did not want its golf course detonated for the film's climactic sequence, which was, from the production's perspective, entirely understandable because the pyrotechnic requirements for blowing up an 18-hole to dramatic comic effect are not things that a functioning golf course can absorb and simply carry on. The solution was to build a large artificial hill from scratch on a portion of the property that could be sacrificed, so that the real fairways remained intact while the film got its explosion. The hill was constructed, the pyrotechnics were prepared, and the detonation was planned as a controlled event. The detonation was not, as it happened, particularly controlled. The FX crew had used significantly more explosives than the sequence required, and the resulting explosion was large enough that a commercial airline pilot flying over South Florida at the time looked down, saw what appeared to be a catastrophic event on the ground, and reported it to air traffic control as a possible plane crash. Emergency response protocols were initiated before the situation was clarified. The owners of the country club were not watching any of this happen because the production had taken elaborate steps to ensure they weren't. The club owners had initially refused to allow the explosion at all, so executive producer John Peters invited them to dinner and organized what was described as a scenic boat ride, supposedly as a gesture of thanks, but actually as a diversion to keep them occupied and away from the property, while the pyrotechnics team did what the owners had explicitly said they could not do. By the time anyone returned from the boat, the hill was gone, the cameras had what they needed, and the owners of Rolling Hills Country Club had been deceived with a hospitality outing. The explosion story is remarkable for its audacity, but there is another piece of Caddyshack production history that is darker and less often discussed, one that involves the film's co-writer and the fact that he died before he ever got to see what the movie actually became. Number 3. The co-writer who never saw it succeed. Douglas Kenney co-wrote Caddyshack with Harold Ramis and Brian Doyle Murray, co-produced it, and appears briefly in the film itself, in the background of the Bushwood Club dinner party scene. He had co-founded National Lampoon magazine in 1970 and co-written Animal House in 1978, making him one of the defining figures of American comedy in the 1970s. When Caddyshack opened in July 1980 to negative reviews from critics, despite doing reasonable business at the box office, Kenney became deeply depressed. The film he had given years of his life to was being dismissed by the press as crude and juvenile, and Kenney, who had grown up wanting to write serious literary work and had been using comedy as a vehicle for something he considered more important, took the critical reception as a personal verdict. Chevy Chase, one of his closest friends, took Kenny to Maui in the summer of 1980, hoping that the environment would help him recover his equilibrium. Chevy eventually had to leave for a work commitment. Kenny's girlfriend came to keep him company, and then also returned to Los Angeles. Alone, Kenny traveled to the island of Kauai, and on August 27, 1980, fell from a 35-foot cliff at the Hanapepe Valley Lookout. He was 33 years old. His death was ruled accidental by Kauai police, but those who knew him were not certain about the distinction. Harold Ramis said, in a line that has become one of the more haunted jokes in the history of comedy, that Doug probably fell while he was looking for a place to jump. Kenny never got to experience what Caddyshack became. He did not live to see it take in nearly $40 million at the domestic box office, or hear its lines enter the American lexicon, or watch the critical consensus shift from dismissal to genuine affection. Bill Murray has said that at the funeral in Connecticut, he turned around and looked at the assembled mourners. Every major figure in American comedy from that era was present, and nobody laughed. Every funny person in the world was there, Murray said, and no one laughed. Chevy Chase eventually sought closure from a psychic who said, "Slipped, slipped. He's standing right there. He says it was the stupidest way he could have ever died." The darkness at the center of the Caddyshack story is that the film's own creator did not live to see it succeed. But the specific mechanics of how it got made are their own kind of revelation, starting with where the story actually came from, which was from a golf club in suburban Chicago that several members of the Murray family had worked at as teenagers. Number 2, it was someone's reality. Brian Doyle Murray, who co-wrote the script and plays the caddy master Lou Loomis in the film, based the screenplay directly on his experiences as a caddy at Indian Hill Club in Winnetka, Illinois, a position he held as a teenager along with his brothers Bill and John and, separately, Harold Ramis. The Haverkamp couple, the elderly members who can barely make contact with a golf ball and shuffle through every scene in a fog of benign incompetence, were directly based on a real couple at Indian Hill, a pair of longtime members named John and Ilma, who Doyle Murray observed with the mixture of affection and exasperation that the film captures perfectly. The Baby Ruth candy bar that gets thrown into the swimming pool in one of the film's most memorable sequences was, according to Doyle Murray, based on an actual prank that the Murray boys pulled as teenagers, though the specific circumstances have been told, with enough variation across interviews, that the exact details are difficult to reconstruct. The biographical foundation of the material explains why so much of it feels observed rather than constructed. But the element of Caddyshack that audiences found most irresistible in 1980 was not its accuracy, but its improvisation. And no single piece of improvised material in the film has a stranger origin story than the scene between Chevy Chase and Cindy Morgan. Number 2, the oil massage scene was completely unscripted. The scene in which Ty Webb pours massage oil over Lacey underall was not written in advance or planned in any conventional sense. Cindy Morgan has said that the scene was entirely improvised in the moment, and that when Chevy Chase produced the bottle of oil and began actually dousing her with it, her exclamation was not a performance of surprise, but a genuine reaction to something she had not been expecting. Chevy's response, invoking David Berkowitz as a comparison to himself, was his own improvised reply to her genuine shock, delivered without preparation and kept in the film because it was better than anything the script had offered. The improvised excellence of the cast was what elevated Caddyshack above the sum of its chaotic parts. But Rodney Dangerfield, who gave what many consider the film's most energetically funny performance, had to be taught the basic grammar of filmmaking before any of it could happen, because he had almost no experience in front of a movie camera. Number 1. Rodney Dangerfield had to be told what action meant. Rodney Dangerfield had been a working stand-up comedian for decades by the time he was cast in Caddyshack, and his multiple appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson had made him one of the most recognizable comedy performers in America. What he had almost no experience with was the specific grammar of film production. The first scene Rodney filmed was the pro shop sequence, and when Ramos called action. For the first time, Rodney simply stood there. Ramos called it again. Rodney stood there again. Ramos walked over and explained that action was the cue to begin performing. Rodney's response was, "You mean, do my bit?" Ramos confirmed that this was, in fact, what he meant. For the remainder of the production, Ramos dispensed with the conventional director's vocabulary and simply told Rodney, "Okay, Rodney, do your bit." Which fact surprised you most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.